My name is Don Isaac. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Research and Grants. And I'm pleased to introduce our sabbatical speaker this afternoon. She needs no introduction, but she's going to get one because a lot of the people listening in are probably her family members. But anyway, I'd just like to share that Jill Brennan-Lincoln is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Theater Arts. She has her BFA from Southern Methodist University and MA from Cal State University, Los Angeles. Her professional expertise includes acting techniques, audition techniques, and on-camera acting, in addition to many other things, but those are kind of the three major things that she has cited. She has worked professionally in regional theater, Broadway, film, and television. Our website says for more than 20 years. I want to say for around 30 years, but you can correct me. The theater venues that she has worked at include are on both the East and West Coast and several places in between. And as I looked through her little blurb online, it was really interesting to see all the different little towns, that not little towns, big towns, talking about Cleveland, Houston, and so on. Her several TV productions include work on the ABC Drew Carey Show and HBO If These Walls Could Talk, Part 2. And then more recently, Jill has played the recurring roles of Gracie Jane on Boston Legal, that's an ABC presentation, and ABC's Tish Atherton on Desperate Housewives. And today, Jill will be sharing about her work titled Acting Class in Session, which is really a podcast with the intriguing goal of bringing academic and professional worlds together. Okay, so thanks so much. And Jill, you have till 1 o'clock. Hopefully you can finish a little bit earlier to give people an opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Don. I greatly appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone a week before a holiday and at the end of a very long remote semester joining me today. I promise to make it as interesting as possible. My fall 2019 sabbatical was spent researching, planning, organizing, writing, recording, and producing the first episode of the podcast Acting Class in Session. Now, before I start, you know that you are interacting right now with an actress and a acting professor. So a large part of my job is interaction. And so I am going to ask right off the bat, who listens to podcasts? And if you do, what's your favorite and why? Be bold.
I like to listen to Fresh Air on NPR. Terry Gross is great. The interviews are long form instead of short form, which I like because it gets more in depth. She kind of asks questions that I think I would ask if I were an interviewer, so I like that one.
Thank you, Jim Lincoln. Anybody else?
I don't have a favorite, but I'm on my phone. I'm sorry. But this summer, when I watched Lost with my family, we found two people who did a podcast about the show. And it was just so fun because it involved knowledge, learning, interviews with the actors. And it was a way to ignite my kids into a new art form.
Oh, I love that, Kirsten. That's fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, I like to listen to podcasts when I go for walks.
Yeah.
And of course, Wait, Don't Tell Me makes me laugh. So those times when I need to chuckle. But also, I've been listening to Learning How to See, which is really challenging me to look at different points of privilege and how I can maybe speak to that in the classroom.
I love that, Nancy. Thank you. Bill, were you saying something?
I still enjoy watching TED Talks and listening to TED Talks.
Absolutely. And Jamie?
Yeah, I started listening to Don't Ask Tig. So Tig Notaro, the comedian, she has an advice podcast that I think is really funny. So I like that one.
So let me ask you, Jamie, why do you stay listening? What keeps you engaged?
What keeps me engaged is I like the fact that she has guests on, so that's a new aspect. So that brings something different to the show every week, but her format remains the same. So I kind of know what to expect a little bit, and some of her segments are the same. So, but having those different personalities add the entertainment for me.
Great. I love it. So piggybacking kind of on what Kirsten was talking about, I think a recurring theme I hear when I talk to you guys and when I'm out talking to others about podcasts and what keeps them interested is this idea that it's something we don't know or we want to know more about, or it is the host and the interviewee having an intriguing story and something that pulls us in. And of course, as a theater artist, that's something I do and know well. My entire career has been in the pursuit of storytelling. And I think many in this room in cinematic arts and any of the arts, we understand that. And we're engaged in this because we want to bring people together and we see stories as a way of doing that. I was just saying the other day, if you're standing in the Starbucks line and there's a new colleague that you're uncomfortable to say hello to, there's nothing better than bringing up a film or TV show. If you're on a first date and you're trying to see if you're compatible, I think it's a wonderful way to bring up a movie or a TV show that's a bit controversial and see where people land. But most importantly, I think that one of the things that intrigues me the most is that when Jesus came as God in human form to us, he didn't choose to lecture or write a book. He chose to tell stories. And I believe that's because he knew that would be the greatest way to affect listeners, to be intrigued by him and want to know more about him and realize our need for him. Of course, that is the inspiration of one of the reasons why I wanted to do a podcast. It's a new and current progressive way of storytelling that I wanted to get involved in. I also wanted to, have the opportunity to explore some of the professionals I've had a chance to work with. And I realized at a certain point, all of the professional directors and actors and writers and casting directors I've been fortunate to work with were successful when I worked with them at the time, but now they're even more successful. And as Dawn so lovely said, I've had a wonderful time working professionally in Los Angeles and New York. I have an unusual body of work that ranges from regional theater all the way to Broadway and film and TV. And in film, I've been fortunate to work with Jane Anderson, an Emmy award-winning director, and great actors that I learned so much from, like Holly Hunter and Paul Giamatti and Vanessa Redgrave. But in television, and I am going to share my screen with you right now. Here we go. I'm so proud of myself. In television, I've had a wonderful opportunity to work as Gracie Jane on Boston Legal, as Dawn said, and Tish Atherton and Desperate Housewives, and Crazy Carrie on Gilmore Girls. In theater, my career has allowed me to work with the Tony Award-winning director John Rando for Urinetown in the East Coast National Tour of the Broadway show Moon Over Buffalo. And I also had an opportunity to work with the Academy Award-winning Tony Award-winning writer John Patrick Shanley, who wrote Moonstruck and was in the Broadway production of Psychopathia Sexualis with him. At this point, I also began to realize that both my academic and my professional experiences are beginning to give me a confidence that I can helm a podcast. I think many of us that are professors and administrators leading different functions began to gather that confidence. But I also garnished a great deal of experience in this when I was running my own business in Los Angeles when I opened my own acting studio called the Brennan-Gould Acting Studio, allowing me as a BFA director and a chair of AP Theater Arts to host several Q&As with industry professionals, emceeing talkbacks with cast and directors, and following productions and overseeing marketing and advertising. Lastly, I really found a great deal of information through my recruiting with an incredible faculty and staff in theater arts as a BFA director and then eventually a chair. As I think our team watched that national recognition enhanced our program and growth, as well as our talent, when we were just so fortunate to get featured in the New York Times and the LA Times for the West Coast premiere of To Kill a Mockingbird, when we were ranked on Onstage blog as one of the top 30 programs in the country, and our current BFA is number 17 in the country. And also when we were cited last semester in a remote semester as having one of the strongest industry showcases in the West Coast in the Hollywood Reporter. All of these allowed me to see the possibilities, these inspirations that a podcast, I believe, could further help APU Theater Arts meet my creative need and help Theater Arts meet our mission to be the premier Christian theater program in the country. So now, here's another interactive moment. Before we move forward, I have an acting assignment for you. I promise not to embarrass you, but it's important and it will come to play in a few minutes. I would like you to look in your room or another room, or either on the very short line of a Brady Bunch Zoom boxes that we see. And I want you to pick one person, or if you're in a room with a pet, even a pet will work. And I want you to participate in the observation exercise with me. And there are two components. One, you're going to find someone to watch, a pet, anyone. Two, you're going to take notes for about 30 seconds to a minute on anything you see them do, physical tasks, how they drink coffee, how they listen, how they write, if they're a dog, how they're rolling around on the ground. So do that while I'm talking, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. So as I began to prepare for the podcast, I do what all artists do, and that is break stories and pitch. I met with several different people to talk about what demographics I should be looking at. Is there a niche for a needed podcast when there's so many out there? I had a wonderful time meeting with Tony Bancroft to host a podcast with his brother, the Bancroft brothers, and talk to him and his experience as being an animator, and of course our program director in cinematic arts, on any tips he could give me, software, equipment, what works in an interview, what doesn't work. He was wonderful, helpful with that. And I finally came to realize that I saw a niche. I saw where I didn't see podcasts being done on acting. And that would be that there would be a professor of acting that also had an inspiring and impressive list of working professionals. And at that point, I knew I had a plan. I would create a podcast which bridges academic and professional worlds that included a section with acting techniques and an assignment, and then moved in to talking to distinguished artists in the industry. It'd be an episodic series examining the art of acting, writing, directing, with professionals from film, TV, theater, and new media in Los Angeles and New York, a podcast that helps artists develop tools needed to go from, from the classroom to a career in the entertainment industry. Research and preparing for the podcast happened in 3 phases. The first phase was to explore other podcasts, develop themes, assemble a guest list, create a working title. And I began with looking at the listening to and examining actor CEO that focuses on tools for the actor, theater people, another one that I love that talked to Tony nominated actors that were just allowed to talk about anything they wanted. One of my favorites was In the Envelope on Backstage, that had interviews with successful writers, directors, actors that their goal, they had either won or they were nominated for an award. And finally, Living the Dream. I then moved on into examining what in the world would I talk about? What are progressive and important themes that I felt like would be interesting to the demographic that I'm going to be trying to reach, as well as fascinating to myself and these industry guest artists I would be bringing in. And some of the themes were, how does faith integrate into a purpose-driven career? What do we need to be, or do we need to be entrepreneurs? Of course, auditioning tips. And then, of course, one close to my heart, how has the impact of women in the industry changed through the years or not? And one of my favorites, can actors say no to work? What inspires great work? And how is SAG, our actors union, opening up more doors for diversity and inclusion? I was then able to move towards making a guest list of some of the working professionals I've been so fortunate to work with, and reached out to some of them. And we actually have 4 or 5 lined up for this semester. Lauren Graham from Gilmore Girls, and Jeff Nordling in Big Little Lies, and George Wendt. That's a long story from a pilot I did a long time ago, playing Norm in Cheers. Tom Spezialy, a wonderful writer and producer for Desperate Housewives and Watchmen. Mary McNamara, a Pulitzer Prize winner for the LA Times and TV critic, and a host of casting directors and agents. But possibly my favorite on this guest list was a classmate of mine at SMU, who was a commercial actor, did a lot of TV and film, but was Ronald McDonald for 10 years. And he has a great story to tell about that. Lastly, I locked down the format for the podcast. Again, the assignment coming at the beginning after the introduction, and then moving into the distinguished interviewee, and was able to come up with a title that I felt encompassed what I would be doing in the podcast, and that was Acting Class in Session. Phase 2, I assembled a wonderful production team, created a marketing plan with the help of a wonderful production team, biographical research, and I wrote a script. I was so fortunate to have be working with such impressive colleagues in theater arts. Gavin Wyrick, our theater arts technical director, stepped on board. He has a lot of experience in voiceover work and sound design, did an exceptional job. Ashley Bagwell, our marketing and social media coordinator, also just done exceptional work for us in theater arts, created the first online showcase in the country for us last year, works professionally with other businesses. And lastly, Thomas Firestone, a rock star from the Cinematic Arts Department. I reached out to ask if there was any students they thought might be interested in being an editor and sound design for us. And he came highly recommended by Chair Michaels and Jesse Negron, and he did an exceptional job. So the team met, we coordinated a few times, and we came up with, I believe, a strong game plan that started with Ashley Bagwell's marketing research. She came up with specs, postings, 10 podcast marketing tips, from press releases to social media to hashtags. She developed wonderful ad examples of fantastic ideas for social media, from quotes to behind the scenes. And then, of course, she helped us come up with our art and design help from the wonderful art department and design department, helped us come up with a potential logo. And I especially appreciate Ashley, because as we were waiting to take my picture professionally to put in this logo of Acting Class in Session, she saw the equality between my career and my excellence and Meryl Streep. Very wise team member that I'm so fortunate to work with. Finally, Thomas our editor brought in, and sound designer, several samples of music and sound cues for the team to choose from. And we were able to create the tone and the brand of the podcast. And Gavin did a wonderful job of acquiring equipment and software and a studio for us to work in. And so finally, we came together and we were able to put together a introduction, and let's listen to that right now. Hello and welcome to Acting Class in Session. My name is Jill Brennan-Lincoln. I am your host, a professional actor and acting professor. Our goal is to share tips and engage in inspiring conversations with some of the most talented artists in the industry, helping you develop tools that will take you from the classroom to getting you the career you want in the entertainment industry. If you want to continue to get tips and tricks from some of the top industry professionals, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Finally, I moved back into research and began preparing and including biographical research into our first guest's career as I prepared for interview questions and an outline, and finally wrote a script. So phase 3, last phase of the research, was equipment, a studio, a first guest, a first assignment, and finally recording and editing the interview. As I said before, Gavin Wyrick was dynamite in helping us locate the perfect software to navigate sound, give us nice sound balances between me in a studio and someone else in their home, and did a fantastic job locking down the perfect studio for both of the parties. And then finally, I decided I believed that our first episode, it was so important to have our first guest be a Christian artist, as well as an alumni from APU, one we're very proud of. And we were so fortunate at the timing of taping this broadcast at all the exciting things going on for Ricky. He is an APU alumni, a writer, a director, and he owns the Neighborhood Film Company. Fascinating, a commercial company that gives internships and helps the incarcerated get jobs. A wonderful blend and story of marrying his Christian faith with his talents. Ricky directed a short film, The Cage, and he also directed the feature film, Concrete Cowboy, which is currently getting rave reviews from its screening at the esteemed Toronto Film Festival and Variety. And as you can see here, starring Golden Globe winner Idris Elba. Concrete Cowboy was just recently bought by Netflix and will air this spring. Such an incredible moment for Ricky and APU Theater Arts and CODA. Now we are back to your assignment. I realized that once I had picked Ricky, I thought I had the perfect assignment, the observation assignment. So I appreciate you all. Is anyone brave enough to share with us what they saw in that 30 seconds to a minute? And if it's me, I know I'm going to see a lot of hand gestures. Anybody want to share what they saw?
Well, I was watching the dog, and although he laid there most of the time, anytime any noise or happened to move, he looked up like that. So he has a very serious case of FOMO, fear of missing out. So that's what I observed. The dog has FOMO.
I love it. Thank you, Jim. Bill.
The person I looked at turned their head to the left twice, looked down once, appeared to be writing, pursed their lips 7 times, scratched their face once, and smiled once.
Oh, Bill, that is wonderful. And I'm not surprised. Such a detailed artist yourself. That is fantastic. As Richard Boleslawski would say, that is great work in observation. Actually, I'm going to talk about Richard Boleslawski. He was a disciple of Konstantin Stanislavski. Stanislavski is the father of realism, and realism is the acting technique that we all use in most films and TV and in theater nowadays. And Boleslavsky wrote a book called The 6 Lessons, and the 5th lesson that he taught was on observation, where he encouraged his actors to go out and examine the material of which they work with when developing characters, and that's humanity. In fact, this is indeed my favorite exercise. I am so fortunate to get to teach the BFA students as they come into the program and as they lead. And this is one of the exercises I teach when they come in as freshmen. It's my favorite because I get a chance to encourage them to go leave the bubble that they've been in and to go out and find one person to observe. They are tasked that they must be out of their socioeconomic group, and they must watch them for 10 to 15 minutes, not get caught watching them. Then they are to come home and reenact all the tasks they saw them doing, grab the props and the costumes that they felt worked, and then come up in front of the class and reenact it. And it is truly an exciting moment for me. One of the most rewarding as a professor for 3 reasons. One, there's nothing like listening to students realize that acting is not about fictional characters. It's actually about people, and that writers write about people. And secondly, is that the stories that they are playing and the characters they've developed, like a homeless person, that moment they realized that they took the moment to stop and watch someone and engage and step out of their comfort zone, they could begin to examine that there are many people that we don't notice. And if we really look deeply, they have a story, and we want to know why, and we want to know who they are, and we want to know how they got there. And it envelops this empathy in actors that is, I believe, bar none to most professions. And last but not least is the light bulb moment that happens for Christian actors when they realize that acting is not going to be about themselves. Acting is going to be missional, that they are going to be sharing stories that are based on human beings, and that the goal is to get it right for those human beings. So again, I felt like this observational assignment would be a good parallel to Ricky's journey and Ricky's work with the homeless and his work with the incarcerated. So I will play the assignment from the podcast. Today, we will answer questions like, should actors, writers, and directors become entrepreneurs? Does creating art with a purpose free us from self-expectations as an artist? Before we welcome our guests, let's start with a challenge for the week. Acting is missional at its heart because it's about people, and human beings are the material that our characters come from. Head out into the world and find yourself a person to follow. Find someone that is not in your socioeconomic group, jump on a subway or a bus and look for a person that intrigues you. Notice everything about them, their tasks, how they sit, what do they wear, what are they doing or saying. Write it down, rehearse it. I am betting you will begin to want to know more about them and who they are. Now, write their story, create a monologue for them, rehearse it, perform it. I think you will find that you will want to get the story right for the person you watched instead of your performance. Storytelling with a purpose of sharing humanity takes the focus off ourselves as performers and on to creating truth. And finally, the last part of our podcast was to record the interview with Ricky Staub and to edit it. And again, Gavin and Thomas were instrumental in this portion of the podcast, and I'm very grateful. But I will leave us now with listening to a portion of the interview with Ricky from the podcast. Today, my guest is Ricky Staub, a former APU alum, and I'm proud to say a student of mine from APU Theater Arts. Ricky has had great success. He was a wonderful actor, former assistant to Sam Mercer, working together on things like Last Airbender and Snow White and the Huntsman. Ricky then did something unique and walked away from Hollywood and began the Neighborhood Film Company that creates mainstream commercial fare and gives apprenticeships to the incarcerated. It was a good move because Ricky became an award-winning director of the festival-winning short film Cage, and most recently, Ricky was featured in Variety for directing a feature film with Golden Globe winner Idris Elba. So, Ricky Staub, thank you for being my guest and welcome to the podcast. You know I'm a big fan of your work, so let's start at the beginning. You got a degree at APU, Theater Arts. And I always think it's interesting that some of the best directors trained as actors at some point in their acting career or acting experience. So my question is, how did that training help you as a director?
That is a great question. And I actually think that my training as an actor is probably one of the strongest things I have as a director. I would go as far as to say that I think everyone that wants to be a director should take acting classes. They're terrible, just so they understand what it's like to be communicated to as an actor and what does and does not make sense. Because I think a lot of shortcomings for directors that I've just seen from the sideline before I was doing it was their lack of ability to communicate what they wanted. And so for me, I feel like some of my best professors, teachers, directors when I was acting were those that were just incredibly good at communicating what they wanted to get out of me. And I only learned that because I was actually on the other side for so long.
Yeah.
A lot of my tips, actually, not just to make you blush, but were a lot of things I remembered from classes of yours.
Oh, Ricky, you're making me blush.
That were actually really applicable. Like, there were two things, and the first thing I ever really, I feel as though I directed, because I actually don't consider commercials really directing, which is a very probably provocative thing to say, but
it is.
I can get into that later if we want. Open that can. But
yeah, nice.
The Cage, which was the short film that I made, was the first time I directed something, and it was with people that weren't actors. And I remember something, I don't know how you communicated it I don't even know what the class was that I took with you, or class is. It's kind of blurry. But that this idea that, I don't know if you said it or if just how you were as a teacher, was that you were always so crazy and invested in the scene with us that it always made me feel less self-conscious to be crazy and silly. And I remember thinking, and then remembering it later when I was directing, that one of the biggest hurdles to get over for actors is just this idea of feeling self-conscious.
Yeah.
I think of that when I have my son here. He is so wild and free, and he plays pretend because he's not self-conscious. I think a lot of people actually have the ability to be good actors, but they're just so consumed with being self-conscious.
Yeah. So, I'm bringing you back. Here we go. Thank you. So that was Ricky Staub, a portion, and of course there's a lot more. I really benefited a great deal from this sabbatical. I think all of us can relate who are been in teaching a long time, the chance to quit serving others for a few minutes and to serve that creative source within ourselves, to pull together a lot of the things I've been working on the last few years, between performing and hosting and marketing and all those kinds of components, to have them culminate in that moment. I really enjoyed reconnecting with some people from the industry I hadn't seen in a long time that really inspired me. And it's never a bad thing to talk to another casting director or another producer every now and then. And I also believe that acting class in session has the potential to benefit theater arts and CODA and APU. I think it continues to do what the faculty and staff are doing so well already in theater arts, which is bridge that gap and make that professional connection to Los Angeles when we're only 30 minutes away. but it also, I thought, I envision it being a place for us to bring in wonderful talent within theater arts, within coda, within art, within cinematic arts, within music, and to bring people together to talk about what they're doing and how well they're doing it and celebrate that. Of course, that weighs so heavily, as we've learned in theater arts, at being a great recruiting tool as well. But I also see it as a place where the students can get involved. If we have technically minded students in theater arts or in cinematic arts that want to do something like this, that we can continually bring them in. And then I'm hoping that the podcast will be heard nationally for more than 3 people, and I'll be working on making that happen. But it will air on Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, APU Theater Arts YouTube channel. And in 2021, we have 5 more podcasts scheduled, and we'll record all of them, and then we will launch them in 2021 when the pandemic is done. And we will enter them into festivals like the Rio Festival and the Atlanta Fringe Festival and the International Festival of the Arts. So thank you for listening. That concludes my presentation of my 2019 sabbatical. You've been wonderful, very, very helpful and engaging in the acting assignment. And I don't know, Dawn, if we want to open it up to questions right now. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I would like to, we have till 1 o'clock. We don't have to go that long, but I certainly would like to have your audience have a chance for questions. And while they're thinking about their questions, Ricky's comments actually reminded me of an anecdote that I think is worth sharing. He thought that directors should all take acting lessons or something like that. I would even go as far as to say I think academic administrators should also all take acting, because just from my own personal experience, I'm a physicist, and some years ago I was in the dean's office of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and at that time Jill's department, it was called TFT, Theater, Film, and Television, as most of you know, was in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So I was asked as associate dean to go over to her department once, a couple times, and to sit through their department meetings, and report back to the dean. And I'll never forget the first time I did that. Again, I'm a physicist, and I went back to the dean, and I really remember an interaction between that you were having, Jill, with someone else. That was just like, it just so startled me. And I was like, what is going on here? This is like much ado about nothing. And I was just so shocked what was going on, and not understanding. And then about 2 weeks later, I read an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education about a person who did about exactly the same thing I did. And they said, that's what those folks are doing over there. They're acting. And the whole time in your department meeting, you were having, you, in a sense, you were on stage, and I just didn't, as an administrator, I didn't understand it. And if I would have had a little more experience in acting, I would have had so much more insight into what was happening at your department meeting. So I
love that, Dawn. I think we would call that passion. And and also that there's I mean, Kirsten, so many, Bill, I see Monica, there's so many of us that could weigh in and say that so much of our training is to speak truth and to confront and to engage, not fearfully, but openly. So yeah, I love your honesty in that. It can seem unusual. It's definitely not a standard meeting for a 9 to 5 office.
Yeah, and it wasn't acting like pretending. It was more like acting in sense of getting your point across.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so that
passionate, yeah.
And probably Bill was the chair at the time.
I don't think Bill was. I think Bart McKinley.
It might have been Bart or somebody.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, who else has a question or two?
Kirsten.
how do you, I know it sounds like you have 5 more planned. Do you plan like a same, like a YouTube channel with the podcast? You'll have to plan an expected release date so that people who like it kind of know when it's, I know they sign up for it. Is that what you're planning to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kirsten. Thanks for asking that, for that clarity. Yeah, and Ashley can weigh in too. Ashley did such a good job with that research for us. Yeah, you want to make sure that you book everyone and then you lock down a significant amount before you launch. And then you want to be launching a podcast at the same time every 2 weeks. Depending on how many you want to do. Some people do, I think the most we decided we wanted to do would be 2 a month at tops, until we gained more momentum. But yeah, that's definitely right. That you want to have enough, be recording 4 or 5 ahead so you can be promoting it prior to it dropping in and people are ready to listen to it. And I think that's where most podcasts fall apart, is keeping up that pace. And that's why I thought it was so important to put together a fantastic production team. That would be very helpful in making sure that happened and it wouldn't land on one person. And I was so grateful to Ashley for stepping in that area. Great. Thank you for asking that, Kirsten. Anybody else?
Who is your dream guest?
Ooh, Jamie, that is fun. Well, I wouldn't mind talking to George Clooney for a few minutes, because you do get to FaceTime then. My husband just yelled, "Hey." No, I would really love to one of my favorite actresses always is Vanessa Redgrave. I've always loved her work as a Brit. Maggie Smith. These incredible actresses that began in Shakespeare with language and have also had these really amazing careers, and some of the ways they've paved for us as women in doing that and playing such strong roles. So I'd love to interview them as well. And George Clooney just on the side, just for 10 minutes. I'm teasing. But no, I would. That's a great question. Thanks, Jamie. Anybody else?
Well, I feel like so much of what we've been able to teach in the past is really being challenged in the current moment, right? The observation exercise when we're all scared to death of each other and so on. And I guess I want to say to that end, how do acting lessons help us recover what has been kind of shredded away over these months? So it's not a practical question, because I realize you're not going to try to teach how to do this while we're in this. But since you are launching in 2021 and hope to be on the other side, have you given much thought to what conversations could be had in light of what has happened?
I'd be interesting for you and Kirsten and so many other people doing this. And Nancy is in here, who just directed for us the New Media, New Works Festival, Nancy Ruby. That's such a good question. I tend to believe that what's so fun about artists are, right, that it, particularly any artist, is that, particularly actors and directors, is that most of the time the regular world, the people that go to a 9-to-5 job that do important things and benefit our society greatly, but when something really dramatic happens or confrontational or fearful, that is when it is practical and makes intellectual sense to step away and to protect yourself and to stay out of an uncomfortable moment and see how it happens. But the call for an artist, particularly actors and writers and directors, is to go in, to step into the situation when at the most uncomfortable situations and live in them. And when we do that, we're the ones who then can actually recreate the moment later. We're the ones who write about it, right? We're the ones who direct it. We're the ones who play the characters because we didn't step away. We stepped in, we noticed, we were aware, we were current, we involved ourselves in it, and that only enriches the story we're going to write or tell about the moment we're in. I'm sure so many of you could elaborate on that even better than I just did, but that's what I believe.
I love that. Thanks.
Thank you for asking it, Monica. Anybody else? Yeah, Bill.
I have this notion that art has two functions. It mirrors culture or it informs culture.
Yeah.
And so how do you see the podcast functioning in those two areas? You think you're going to do both? You're going to emphasize one or the other? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I want to do both. I think there's starting with Ricky, that really taught me that there's a way to do both. And the thing that I love so much about, I think you and I were talking about that a week ago, Bill. One of the things I'm so excited about working at a Christian university and being an artist in a Christian environment is the potential to do both and yet engage in culture, right? And be successful in culture and be intrigued by everyone's story, whether it aligns with mine or not, but also inform it in subtle ways that can be heard, and also be a good listener. So yeah, I see this podcast doing both. Anybody else? Yes, Martha.
So how would one fund a podcast or a series of podcasts? So where does the money come from for these?
That's a really good question, Martha. I think it isn't as expensive as you think. That's why I think there's been so many that have popped up, because if I was going to do a film, or I was going to create when I first started, I thought, oh, well, and I'm sure many of you can relate. I actually had a sabbatical planned for 5 years ago, and then I became chair and put it on hold. And at that time, I was going to do something like the Actors Studio, Bravo, and film it and bring in guests that way and interview. And as I move forward, these podcasts became so popular, and I believe they're so popular because they're very affordable. Buying a mic is not that expensive. You can download several softwares like Audacity to help you do that, and use recordings like Wave. Gavin really walked me through a great deal of that. I learned a great deal. And also the most exciting part is I can be, if we have the correct sound software and a good editor, I can interview someone in New York or LA. And when I interviewed Ricky, he was in his garage and I was at APU in the communication sound studio. So I was fortunate to go to APU and have some of those things available to me. But I do think podcasts are very popular right now because they're affordable. And it's kind of exciting to me. It's like that whole free market of everybody gets a chance and the best will rise to the top. There are some podcasts that people started without any money, and yet they did a really exceptional job. And now they're some of our favorite podcasts. And then, of course, people start investing in them and producing them, and they get more money to have a studio and more of a production team to support it. Great question. Thank you, Martha.
Going back to Bill's question, comment about art mirroring culture or informing culture. One of the things that, like when I'm watching a movie that's based on a historical figure, something like Abraham Lincoln or Malcolm X, or it's not a documentary, but it's a movie. I always have this question in my mind Geronimo reminded also. Am I being had? Am I being, told something that it's not really mirroring culture? So as an artist, do you worry about that?
Can you be a little bit more clear for me, Don? What are you asking again?
When I'm watching, say, a film that's
Mhm.
based on a historical figure,
Yes.
examples they just come to mind right away are Geronimo, Abraham Lincoln, so on. They're not documentaries; they're actually movies. And I always wonder
Yeah.
if I'm being had in terms of, because Bill says it mirrors culture, and I'm wondering, is it really mirroring culture, what really happened, or is it distorting it and telling me something that the producer or director wants me to know, or lead me that way? I just wonder if you could just comment on that in your own work.
Sure. And I have some colleagues on this call that also would love to respond, because we have great ideas in our staff and faculty meetings, and I'll let them do it as well. I think we also have to be like, for instance, The Crown is happening right now, right? It just opened on Netflix. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I am sure that the royal family is appalled, because I am sure that 95% of it is an exaggeration. But there is a license that artists are allowed to take, in the sense of they are not trying to recreate history. They're trying to examine it. They're trying to examine a different perspective. So, for example, with The Crown, we're very clear that that writer has some critiques about some choices the royal family has made, and whether or not it still needs to be the center of England right now and an institution. So it's, if we really get to the writer's perspective, we can really start to figure out what they're saying about that part of history. And it's less about reenacting the entire point of view of it, and an acceptance that when we watch a story, it is from a point of view from that director and that writer that leads us to a different way of thinking.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do Kirsten, Monica, you guys want to jump in?
Well, Don, I'll recommend an article written by the writer-director John Sayles. And you can find it in a volume called The Media Journal. And it speaks to, I mean, the exact title eludes me, but he's the only John Sayles in the Media Journal. But he talks to this issue as a writer. Jim could even speak to this more clearly, but about the problems, the inherent problems of trying to accurately recreate history in a fictional work. And the other thing that I've read that's really helpful to me is, the fact that fact and fiction kind of stem from the same Latin root. And one is to do, right? Like if you speak any of the Latin-based languages, you know that often it's the same verb for to do or to make. And I think to Jill's point, it's almost impossible. We fictionalize, cognitive folk tell us that we fictionalize experience immediately in our head. We can't not turn it into a story. And so one is to do, the other is what we make of what we do. And I think Sayles does a really nice job of, in a practical way, seeing why the medium itself, the space of time you have for the story, the interest on the part of the audience and all that kind of stuff, the natural editing that is done about everyday stuff, what somebody had for breakfast. And so it helped me when I read it to understand you can't not do this. So then your task is to just have as much integrity about that as possible. That was my take.
Great. Kirsten.
That's right, Monica. And I was thinking, Don, the things that helped me the most was when I read Gadamer's Truth and Method. That is a huge book. I have it all written up, but it's really an understanding of how all of life is really interpreted. Every text we read comes through a lens of interpretation. It's just such a great book for artists, I think. And as to what Monica said, it's this interesting thing with history and stories. Think of all the Shakespeare plays that are history plays. And he himself, it's very interesting in Hamlet, when he has Hamlet give instructions to the actors, he tells them the importance of art is that it tells the story and gives it the very shape and body of its time. Meaning when we do Hamlet now, it's revealing the shape and body of now. So history stories are always revealing some truth from history, and then people are using them to reveal what he's talking about there. And one more thing from Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar, they say, how many ages hence will this our lofty scene be acted, or in accents yet unknown, in accents yet unborn, unknown in states unborn, or it's the opposite. So he's giving permission to say these historical stories are going to be told so many times. Think about that, in so many different interpreted ways in countries, which here we are in the United States, that was yet to be born. So that's just the little thought I'd throw in.
Thanks, guys. Dawn, you're quite good at this. Got us all talking.
I think Nancy had a question or comment. And we're just about out of time, but did you before, maybe you were going to say something?
I just wanted to say kudos on this project, but also specifically the choice of your first guest. I think that's someone trained, a young artist trained by APU, gone out and doing exemplary work in telling stories, but also affecting positive change in other people's stories. I think that was just a really lovely choice, and congratulations.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, it was intentional, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I think he encompasses what all of us are trying to do, right? As artists right now, when we're training these students, is to go out and make that impact. And it's so exciting when we see it start happening. It's just one of the most rewarding things I think I've ever experienced, seeing it start to happen like that for him. So anyway, thank you. And thank you, Dawn, for allowing me to come in and talk.
Yeah, thanks very much. We usually clap at the LAPD, but or LAPC. But anyway, thanks so much, Jill, for a really interesting presentation and for your good work at APU. And just to let you know that we will make a small $100 addition to one of your upcoming paychecks. So I don't have an envelope to hand to you, so I'm just going to say it right now publicly. And just so let me know if it doesn't show up here in the next few weeks, but I'm sure it will. And just to the rest of you, this is our final sabbatical talk for 2020. We do have a few more in the spring. They're not scheduled yet, but be on the lookout for the Provost newsletter. And again, thanks everybody for having a great time here. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank